Alright, welcome back to Cafe Classics, Unlocking the Iliad. This is Mod 1 Video 3, where we talk about the scope of the course. What all are we going to be covering here? I already described we're not going through the whole story, so what will we be going over? So, to reiterate what we talked about in the previous video, we're trying to learn about the themes and the key ideas that will help us understand the whole story through just a few of the books here. And we'll be touching on a few, probably sections of some of the ones we're not covering. But the goal here is to understand the story and subsequent words through these main themes and ideas. And that will, in turn, like I said, help you to read the whole story and also the Odyssey and other derivative works. So, but in order to grasp that, we have to go over the story of the Iliad. So buckle up. We're going to go over all of the events in all of the books in a very precise summary form in this video. So this might be one of the longer ones, so bear with me here. So book 1, or chapter 1, we could say, we could call The Falling Out. And this is one of the ones we're going to be covering, as you can tell by the double asterisks there. This is where, Agamemnon gets into a dispute with a priest of Apollo. The priest prays to Apollo. Apollo sends a plague, and this leads to an argument between Achilles and Agamemnon, which results in Achilles withdrawing from the fight. So then in book 2, we have the gathering of the armies. And this is where we get, this is like some of the genealogies that you might see in the Bible. You see long descriptions of all the people involved, and we'll get a taste of this in book 4 as well, or I'm sorry, book 3. But first we get Agamemnon's test, and here we get a taste of what we could say Agamemnon's bad leadership is like, where he tries to test the will of his soldiers, and it doesn't go as he had hoped. And we are also introduced to a small minor character about which there's a lot to say, but we're not going to be dwelling on, and that's Thersites. So in book 3, we get a review of the soldiers from the Trojan perspective. And we also get a challenge to a duel between Paris and Menelaus, the two respective men who want Helen. And this leads to a kind of, at first, a kind of ceasefire. All the two armies are sitting down, just watching each other. They're both kind of hopeful that all this can be resolved in this one duel between Paris and Menelaus. And Menelaus would absolutely have crushed Paris, except Paris manages to escape in a shroud of mist sent by Aphrodite and whisks him back to his bedchambers with Helen. So that doesn't go well. Another god talks one of the Trojan soldiers into shooting an arrow at Menelaus, and actually kind of nicks him. Doesn't mortally wound him or anything like that. But Agamemnon is at first convinced that his brother has been mortally wounded by the arrow. And so war breaks out over what could have been the cessation of combat. So after that, we get book 5 we might call Diomedes' Aristeia, which is an Aristeia is like a moment of glory. It's your shining moment where you distinguish yourself above all the rest. Aristeia is derivative from Aristos, which means best of. So we see like aristocrats means better men. So Aristeia is your best moment, essentially. And Diomedes is just a killing machine. He just rampages across the battlefield. There's no one who can stop him. And he's one of the Achaean soldiers. And then some of the gods get involved too. He even injures Aphrodite and Ares. So book 6, which we'll be covering, is in many ways a continuation of Diomedes' Aristeia. We get more battle scenes, and I'm really just including book 6 so that readers can get a taste of the depiction of violence, because it's a huge part of the story, is how Homer describes the battle scenes. And later on, we'll compare that to other poems that attempt to do this from more modern times. But 6 it has those battle scenes, but it also concludes with this very iconic scene in the courtyard of Troy, where Hector returns and essentially says goodbye to his wife Andromache and to his son. And then prior to that, we see a very interesting interaction between Diomedes and a Trojan named Glaucus, and how they address each other on the battlefield and decide not to fight. So then in book 7, we have Ajax and Hector. Hector issues a challenge to the Greeks to duel, sort of like a redo of book 3, but Hector is actually a very serious fighter, not like Paris. And Ajax, the Greeks draw lots to see who will fight them. Ajax is in the pool. Odysseus is in the pool. Menelaus is in the pool. Agamemnon tries to make sure that his brother doesn't fight Hector because he thinks he'll lose. But Ajax wins the lot, or one might say loses the lot, because Hector is a very intimidating fighter. And the two of them fight to a draw. And very similar to what we see with in book 6 with Diomedes and Glaucus, they exchange weapons, which is something that seems to be part of the military culture of the time, and a sign of friendship. So in book 8, again, through all of this time, Achilles and his Myrmidons are sitting back. They're not involved. In book 8, the fighting begins to get more serious, and the Trojans begin to push the Achaeans back. And this is made possible because Athena and Hera, who were, and we'll go over their role in all of this towards the end of this module. But Athena and Hera have basically been chastised by Zeus, and Zeus said, no more god intervention in this battle. This is not your place to intervene here. So Athena and Hera, who had been helping Diomedes, are forced to come back by Zeus, and this permits the Trojans, led by Hector, to really push forward. And the Greeks become worried that they might destroy the ships. And book 9, which is it's a very important book, and this is where we first really see Achilles again. Fighting has gotten serious, and so in a lull between battles, Agamemnon sort of realizes he made a mistake in arguing so strenuously with Achilles. And so he sends an embassy consisting of Phoenix, who is a wise old man, as well as Odysseus and Ajax, to go and speak with him and offer a ransom, essentially, offer a bribe to bring him back. And also, like, hey, come on, this is not about us, this is about protecting the other soldiers. But Achilles rejects the offer, and he gives some reasons why he rejects the offer. And book 10 is a very interesting book. We've got some very primitive kind of werewolf themes going on here. It is about Odysseus and Diomedes going on a night raid together. Odysseus puts on his boar helmet, Diomedes puts on a wolf skin, and they go out to try to spy on the Trojan camp to gather information. And they end up killing a Trojan spy and then killing a bunch of Thracians and stealing their horses. A very Proto-Indo-European chapter. Book 11, the fighting on the battlefield really continues, and this is Agamemnon's Aristeia. And Agamemnon winds up getting injured, but really does a tremendous amount of damage on the battle line, and you get a taste of Agamemnon's kind of brutality, his unwillingness to give mercy to his enemies and to take ransom and so forth. Book 12, after Agamemnon is injured, we get a second Trojan press, and this one is even more serious than the one we see in Book 8. The Trojan forces advance, and they actually break through the exterior of the Achaean defenses. We imagine a kind of palisade wall that the Trojans managed to break through over the ramparts. And Book 13 details the fighting within the camp itself. So the Trojans are pushing the Achaeans all the way back to their ships, and Hector wants to burn them, wants to destroy the ships, to destroy their nostos, to destroy their homecoming, so they'll be trapped on the shore. But he's persuaded by one of his commanders to withdraw and basically quit while he's ahead, and not risk perhaps bringing the Myrmidons into the fight. Book 14, things get interesting with the gods. Hera, who is Zeus's wife, tricks Zeus. She seduces him using with some help from Aphrodite, which is interesting when you understand the dynamic between Hera and Aphrodite in this story. She seduces him, which puts him to sleep. But then while he is asleep, she goes down and rallies the Achaeans and helps them fight back against the Trojans, and almost kills Hector. Not Hera, but the Trojans almost kill Hector. But then in Book 15, Zeus wakes up, and he is not happy. And he threatens not just Hera, but all of the gods. So Hera's favor is withdrawn from the Achaeans, and the fighting resumes with heavy Greek casualties. And Book 15 is really important for people who really want to explore, well, we'll get into the first word, this concept of menis and menin, but Book 15 is where Leonard Molnar begins his exploration of the true meaning of that word, with Zeus's vengeance, not just against Hera, but all of the gods. So Book 16, the Greeks have been suffering heavy losses. They've been here for a long time. Their very ships are in danger. Everyone is injured. Agamemnon is injured. Menelaus is injured. And Patroclus begins to have sympathy for the Greek soldiers who are suffering for no fault of their own because of what Agamemnon did. And so he is inspired to fight. And unlike in the movie Troy, which you may or may not have seen, he does this with Achilles' blessing. Achilles says, yeah, here, go wear my armor. And, but don't try to fight Hector, and don't try to take the city, basically. So, Patroclus takes some of the Myrmidons, and they goes and fight, and he is just an absolute machine. He has his own Aristeia, where he is described as daimoniisos, equal to a superhuman, equal to a god almost. But his hubris takes him too far, and he does try to fight Hector, and his army runs up against the wall of Troy itself, and he is ultimately beaten back by Apollo, is in a sense killed by Apollo, but then Hector delivers the coup de grace. So then in Book 17, we have a huge fight over the body of Patroclus, not just his armor, but his actual body. And there's, we're not going to be covering this chapter, but there are themes that Greg Nage discusses about the importance of the hero's body, how the body of a dead hero is believed to be a source of vitality and fertility to the land and to the nation that possesses it, even the body of an enemy. So the fight over Patroclus' body and how serious it gets tells us something about how important Patroclus was as a soldier and as a person. So the Trojans wind up getting his armor, but Menelaus is able to retain the body and bring it back. Book 18 is one we will be going over, and this is Achilles rearming. This is Achilles learning of Patroclus' death, his grieving over the death of essentially his body double, which is a strange phrase that Greg Nage explains in more detail than I can. And he vows to kill Hector. And then the iconic scene in book 18, and the whole reason we'll be covering it really, is we see Hephaestus, the forge god, make him a new set of armor and a shield. And the shield has deep symbolic value and is descriptively beautiful. It's like 2.5 pages just describing the shield. So very, very important poetically. In book 19, we see the preparation for battle. Achilles formally rejoins the army, and to a degree he reconciles with Agamemnon at this point. He says, okay, it's not about that anymore. The soldiers make their sacrifices and get their horses ready. And we have a strange moment where Achilles' horse speaks to him. In book 20, we see war in heaven. The gods join the armies and rally the soldiers, and the fighting commences. In book 21, very odd chapter, we have Achilles gets into first of all, we begin to see what Achilles is capable of on the battlefield. A lot of guys who are 18, 19, 20, 21, first time they read the Iliad, they think, oh, Achilles is a crybaby, Diomedes is the real hero of the story. This is not true. This is it's an understandable take. It's also, I don't mean to insult anybody, it's kind of an immature take, a heroic take, we might say. In 21, we begin to see what Achilles is capable of in combat. He is, and he gets into a fight with a river, which is upset with him for filling its waters with blood. So Hera aids Achilles, who is able to beat back the river. Book 22 is where Achilles kills Hector. It's a very strange scene because it's not like we see in Troy, the movie, where Achilles challenges him and Hector comes out to face and then they fight. Achilles is chasing Hector round and round the city, and only by a trick is from the gods is Hector convinced that he has a safe way to run, but then realizes he's now trapped alone outside the walls and there's no escape. So then he turns finally and faces Achilles. They fight, and Hector kind of didn't stand a chance. And Achilles kills him, and then in his rage over the death of Patroclus, he attempts to desecrate the body, and he drags Hector's body behind his chariot. In book 23, I had mentioned the Olympic Games before and the Panathenaic Games. In 23 is where we see the precedent for that, where we see the idea of that really laid forward in the funeral games for Patroclus. And there is all kinds of interesting symbolic points here, especially in Nestor's description of how to win a chariot race to his son. But we see this strange moment. It's almost like that World War I Christmas peace moment where everyone is kind of paused from the tragedy of death and war to compete, to eat, to make sacrifices to the gods, and to just live life in an interesting and different way. And then finally, in book 24, which we will also be going over, I forgot to put my asterisk there, but Priam goes to Achilles. And this is maybe the most iconic scene of the entire book. King Priam takes a ransom across the field in the dead of night, this hooded, cloaked figure to go speak with Achilles. And he's guided by Hermes to recover Hector's body. And kind of contrary to Achilles' rage before, he acquiesces and agrees, and he grants a ceasefire, which you might think he doesn't have the authority to grant, but it works. And then the story ends, Patroclus has had his funeral, and now the Trojans have Hector back, and the story ends, and so they buried Hector, breaker of horses. However, you won't understand even that, probably, at least it will seem strange why this 2-week episode of a 10-year war is such an epic story if we don't understand the backstory here. What was going on that led up to this 2-week fight? So first of all, most people I think are going to be familiar with Paris and the abduction of Helen. Paris was in Sparta, where Menelaus was king, and he took Menelaus' wife home with him. Much to the consternation not just of Menelaus, but all of Greece. What isn't known about that, jumped ahead a second, we'll talk about the judgment of Paris in a moment. Now, it often isn't known about Paris and the abduction of Helen. First of all, when Menelaus and Helen were married, basically all of the great men of Greece were in attendance of the wedding and swore an oath to protect the sanctity of the marriage. So when Helen was abducted, all of these men who swore oaths to protect the marriage get called upon. So Odysseus gets called upon, and he famously, pretended to be insane to try to get out of it, but they sort of saw through it. And Achilles was hidden on an island dressed as a woman to escape. So this idea that he was going to war for glory may or may not be canon. But why would Paris abduct Helen in the first place? Well, the myth goes that the three goddesses, Helen, Athena, and Aphrodite, were having a dispute about which of the three of them were the most beautiful. So they chose poor Paris as their judge, a mortal, to judge the beauty of the goddesses. And because this is an ancient Greek story about beauty, it's not really the beauty, but sort of conceptual beauty. Which of these goddesses is most attractive to men in what they stand for, I suppose. And so in this trial, Hera offered him land and riches. Paris is land and riches the most attractive. Athena offered him the opportunity to be the greatest warrior and also the wisest man around. But Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman in the world, and he went with the most beautiful woman. Unfortunately, the most beautiful woman happened to be married at the time. So he, lacking the wisdom that Athena might have given him, they basically stole her. And then the wedding vows of the Greek kings brought them all under Agamemnon to go and restore the honor of the marriage. And I already mentioned Achilles and Odysseus' attempts to evade the war, disguised as a woman and pretending to be insane, respectively. So where does the Trojan horse fit into this story? The Trojan horse doesn't happen until after the events of the Iliad. So the Trojan horse we see on the horizon. Everyone who is hearing the story from Homer would have, in the 9th century BC, would have been aware of the Trojan horse. They would have been aware of the death of Achilles, which is foreshadowed by the death of Patroclus in many ways. So this is the broader context of this war. It details not just the fate of mortal men born to goddesses like Achilles and the death of cities from within, and but it has to do with what men want in a very abstract kind of way, and what men are willing to fight over. And the birth of Achilles itself is interesting. I should detail that here. Achilles was born to a goddess named Thetis and to a mortal man, but his father was almost not Peleus. His father was almost Zeus. Zeus, who was known to have gotten around a little bit, had contemplated having an affair with Thetis, but a Titan named Prometheus told him of an omen that the son of Thetis would be greater than his father. And so if Thetis and Zeus had had a son, the son would have been greater than Zeus. And so Zeus, upon hearing of this Promethean prophecy, said, "Oh, I'm not touching that." And so that near relation, in some sense, kind of colors the relationship we see between Thetis and Zeus within the Iliad itself. So bear that in mind when you read book 1. And it sort of paints the whole nature of Achilles as this doomed man, as the man who could have been not just the greatest man in the world, but the greatest among the gods. That was almost his destiny, but not so. So we're not, as I've mentioned a few times already, we're not reading the whole book. We're going to be reading books 1, 6, 9, a little bit of 18, and a little bit of 24. So try to get the important sections that highlight the themes of this book. We're going to be reading more than the last 20 lines. And again, we're trying to identify the key themes in this book so that we can understand the whole thing and we can understand the themes beyond just the book. So thanks again for taking this course, and let's dive into the real stuff.